What happens when a student falls in love with the one person he can never have? This is the story of Daniel, a quiet boy with a loud heart, and the teacher who saw him when no one else did. It's not a love story. It's a story about love, soft, real, and painful. And it all started in a classroom that welcomed T.O. Quiet Chronicles. And forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank YOU. Daniel was 17 when he transferred to North Hill High School. It was mid-semester, just after winter break. Everything felt cold, outside and inside. The sky was gray. The school hallways were loud. And Daniel? He didn't feel like he belonged. That he walked in on the first day with his hands in his pockets and his sketchbook pressed against his chest like a shield. His mom had told him to smile and try to make friends. But Daniel had moved schools before. He knew how it worked. People already had their groups, their inside jokes, their memories. And he was just a stranger with quiet eyes and a pencil. In class, he sat in the last row by the window. That was his favorite spot. It made it easier to daydream, to draw, and to disappear. While the teacher spoke, Daniel doodled small characters in the corner of his notebook. Not because he didn't care. He just listened better when his hands were moving. Other students whispered about him. Who's the new kid? He doesn't talk much. Kinda weird. He heard them, but he didn't let it show. He had learned to keep his face calm, like water that doesn't ripple even when the wind tries. During lunch, Daniel sat alone. He opened his sketchbook and began to draw the cafeteria. Not the walls or the tables, but the people. The girl laughing too loudly. The boy with food on his shirt. The group staring at their phones. He turned real life into lines and shadows. That was his way of being part of the world, without being in it. The teachers didn't pay him much attention, except for one. Her name was Ms. Carter, but at the time, Daniel didn't know who she was. He just noticed her passing by the lunchroom once. She wasn't like the other teachers. She walked slowly, like she had time for everything. Her eyes scanned the room not to catch trouble, but to understand. Daniel didn't know then that she would become the first person to really see him. That Daniel's second week at North Hill started like the first, quiet, slow, and a little lonely. He kept to himself, drawing during free periods and sitting in the back of every class. Most of the teachers read off slides, gave out worksheets, and barely made eye contact. But everything changed on a Wednesday morning, right before third period. That's when Daniel first walked into room 204. He wasn't expecting anything different. Another class, another teacher, another hour to get through. But the moment he stepped in, something felt warmer. The lights were soft. The desks were arranged in a gentle curve, not just straight lines. On the board, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Today, we find poetry in the ordinary." Daniel raised his eyebrows. He hadn't seen handwriting like that since his old art teacher. It was graceful, like someone had taken their time. He took his usual seat, in the back, by the window. Then she walked in. Ms. Carter. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, and different from what he expected. She wore a long cream sweater over a black dress, with a silver chain around her neck. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she carried a small stack of books in her arms. Not papers, not a laptop, but books. When she smiled at the class, the room actually seemed to soften. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm, but clear. "I'm Ms. Carter, your literature teacher, and I don't believe in boring lessons." A few students chuckled. Daniel looked up from his sketchbook, surprised. She continued, "I want this classroom to feel safe. I don't care how perfect your grammar is. I care how honest your words are." Something in Daniel stirred. He sat up straighter. She didn't talk at the class like most teachers. She spoke to them. Her eyes moved across the room, not judging, just searching. She noticed people, noticed feelings. Then she read a poem out loud. It was short, about a boy sitting at a window, watching leaves fall. But the way she read it, every word felt heavy and real. Like the boy in the poem wasn't just in the story, but in the room. Sitting by the window, Daniel blinked. That boy was him. After class, he didn't rush out. He stayed behind, slowly packing his bag, hoping no one would notice he was lingering. Ms. Carter was writing something on the board. Then she turned around and smiled gently. "You're Daniel, right?" she asked. He paused. "Yeah. You like to draw?" He looked down at the edge of his sketchbook, which had slipped halfway out of his bag. "Yeah, a little." She nodded. "That's good. We need more people who see the world differently." Daniel didn't know what to say, So he just nodded and walked out. But for the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment. The way she said his name, the way she saw him, even when he hadn't said a word. And for the first time since arriving at his new school, Daniel wasn't just counting the hours until he could go home. He was counting the hours until literature class. From that day on, third period became Daniel's favorite hour of the day. Ms. Carter didn't just teach literature. She made the words come alive. Instead of just reading stories, she asked the class how those stories made them feel. Instead of worksheets, she gave them small writing tasks. Write a memory that tastes like summer, or describe your favorite silence. It was strange at first. The other students groaned or joked around. But Daniel? He loved it. He started writing. Not because he had to, but because something inside him wanted to speak. And Ms. Carter noticed. Whenever she walked by his desk, she would glance at his paper. She never corrected him in red pen. She underlined words she liked. Sometimes she left a small comment in the corner, like, "This line made me pause. You wrote this with your heart, didn't you? I felt this." No other teacher had ever made Daniel feel like his voice mattered. After class, she would sometimes ask him, "Did you draw anything new this week? Or still carrying that sketchbook everywhere?" And he'd smile, nodding shyly. He never showed her his drawings at first. They felt personal, private, but he always felt her interest was real. She wasn't asking to be polite. She genuinely cared. One day, she read a story out loud by a writer named Raymond Carver. The story was about simple things, two people talking in a kitchen, but it felt deep, like there was pain just under the surface. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then she asked, "Why do you think the author chose to say so little?" Hands stayed down. Then Daniel, without thinking, raised his hand. She blinked, surprised. "Yes, Daniel." He swallowed. Sometimes, when people feel too much, they don't say anything at all. They just leave it in the silence. Ms. Carter stared at him for a moment. Then she smiled, slowly. "Exactly," she said. "Beautifully said." A few students turned to look at him, but Daniel didn't mind. In that moment, he felt seen, heard. That he walked out of class that day with a strange feeling in his chest. Not nerves, not excitement. Something softer, quieter, like warmth from sunlight through a window. That he went home, opened his sketchbook, and drew. He didn't know why, but he drew her. Not her face. Not in full detail. Just the back of her standing in front of the chalkboard, writing a quote, her hand midair, the light catching her hair. He shaded it carefully. Asterisk, and beside it, he wrote, "The only time I feel understood is when she's speaking." He closed the book, held it to his chest, and exhaled slowly. He didn't know what this feeling was, but he knew it mattered. It started with small moments. An extra minute after the bell, a slow shuffle to pack his bag, pretending to tie his shoelaces again. Daniel stayed behind after class. Even when he didn't need to. It first, he just lingered. While Ms. Carter cleaned the board or organized her papers. He didn't say much. She didn't rush him. There was no pressure, just silence, a kind silence. Then one afternoon, she looked up from her desk and said softly, "You don't like crowds, do you?" Daniel looked at her, a little surprised, then shook his head. She smiled, not judging. "I didn't either when I was your age. Sometimes I still don't." That made Daniel smile back, just a little. From then on, their after-class moments became more natural. A few words, a small talk about books, music, or why everyone seemed to rush through life. Miss Carter would ask about his drawings, and sometimes he'd show her quick sketches. Nothing too personal, just little pieces. Leaves, faces, empty benches. One day, she picked up a sketch of a rainy window with a single handprint on it. She looked at it for a long time, then said quietly, "This feels lonely." Daniel nodded. It was a lonely day. She handed it back with care. "You have a gift, Daniel. You draw emotion, not just things." He didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to him before. The next week, he stayed behind again. The class had been reading poems about memories, and one line stuck with him. Some days echo like empty halls. He waited until the room was empty, then said, "I wrote something. I mean, it's nothing great." But he handed her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it gently and read. When she looked up, her eyes were soft. "You wrote this?" she asked. He nodded, nervous. "It's beautiful," she said. "It feels honest." Daniel looked down, a little embarrassed. Thanks. Then she said something that stayed with him. Pain is heavy, but when you turn it into art, it starts to float. He nodded, not fully understanding, but wanting to. These small moments, day after day, became the quiet highlight of his life. That IT wasn't love. Not yet, but it was something. Something that felt safe. Something that made him breathe easier. Something that made him stay after class, just for a few extra minutes of feeling seen. 2 weeks passed. Daniel kept drawing more than ever. His old sketchbook, tattered at the edges, filled from front to back, was nearly full. He didn't even realize how much he had been using it until one afternoon. He flipped through the pages and noticed there were only 2 blank ones left. That same day, during literature class, Ms. Carter spoke about expression again. She wrote a quote on the board. Art is the way we whisper our truth into the world. Daniel stared at the words. They hit him deeply. When the bell rang, he didn't leave. He stayed, as usual. Ms. Carter was sipping tea from her ceramic mug, typing on her laptop. She looked up, smiled. No sketchbook today? She asked. He held it up. Almost full. She raised her eyebrows. That's good. Means your mind's been busy. He nodded. There was a pause. Then she said, wait here a second. She walked to a small cabinet behind her desk, opened it, and pulled out a wrapped notebook, simple brown paper tied with string. She returned and gently placed it on the desk in front of him. For me? Daniel asked, confused. I was saving it, she said, but I think it's yours now. He slowly untied the string and opened it. Inside was a fresh, high-quality sketchbook. Thick, blank pages. Smooth to the touch. Not the cheap kind. It looked like something real artists used. I noticed you were always drawing, she said softly. And sometimes, we need new pages to grow. Daniel looked at her. His heart beat a little faster, not in a romantic way. Not yet, but in a way that said, this person sees me like no one else does. He swallowed. I don't know what to say. You already said it, she replied, pointing to his old sketchbook. In there. He smiled, eyes dropping to the gift in his lap. Thank you, seriously. She nodded once, still smiling, then stood up to erase the board. Daniel walked out that day holding the new sketchbook close to his chest, like it was made of gold. And when he got home, he opened to the first page, stared at it for a long time, and finally drew. Not the classroom, not the window, not himself. That he drew her. Her eyes, kind and strong. Her smile, not perfect, but real. And next to her face, in small, neat handwriting, he wrote, for the one who gave me pages when I was running out of space to feel. That night, he stared at the drawing until he fell asleep. He didn't know why his chest felt so full, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more. The next week, Ms. Carter walked into class holding a stack of paper and a soft smile. She placed one sheet on each desk as the students murmured and settled in. Daniel picked his up. At the top, it said, assignment. Write a poem about a moment you never told anyone. The room fell quiet. Some students groaned. Others rolled their eyes. But Daniel sat still, reading the words over and over. A moment you never told anyone. His fingers curled slightly around his pencil. Ms. Carter stood at the front, hands gently clasped together. This is not for marks, she said. This is for you. You don't have to share it with anyone unless you want to. But write with truth, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Then she added, honesty is more powerful than perfection. Daniel stared at the blank space on the paper. His hand hovered, unsure, but slowly. The words began to come. That he wrote about the night his dad left when he was 10. That he wrote about his mother crying on the kitchen floor, thinking Daniel was asleep. He wrote about the silence that followed, how it wrapped around their home like a cold blanket. That he wrote honestly, fully, for the first time. That no one would read it. He was sure, but it was on paper now, out of him. When the bell rang, most students left quickly, complaining about how emo the assignment was. Daniel stayed behind, his paper folded in half. Ms. Carter looked up. Was it too much? She asked gently. He shook his head. No, it was what I needed. She nodded slowly, almost proudly. He hesitated. Then, without a word, he slid the folded paper across her desk. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Are you sure? He nodded. I'll read it carefully, she said. Thank you for trusting me. And he believed her. That night, Daniel stayed up late staring at the ceiling. He felt nervous, exposed, but also lighter. like something heavy had been lifted. The next day, after class, Miss Carter handed the paper back in O grade. No corrections, just for words written in the corner. You are very brave. Daniel blinked, staring at those words for a long time. He put the paper in the back of his new sketchbook, not to hide it, but to protect it. That day, as he left the room, something inside him shifted. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew she was part of it. For a while, it was just quiet moments. Daniel would stay after class, and Miss Carter would chat with him as she packed her things. He'd show her a few sketches. She'd ask about his writing. Nothing more, nothing less. But the air between them always felt special, like a calm space that only the two of them existed in. Until someone else noticed. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything started to change. Daniel was walking down the hall after third period when he heard a voice behind him. Hey, Art boy, someone called. He turned. It was Mason, one of the louder boys in his science class. Not exactly a bully, but loud enough to make people uncomfortable. Daniel blinked. What? Mason smirked. You're always the last one out of room 204. What are you doing? Giving Miss Carter love poems or something? A few other students laughed. Daniel's stomach dropped. It's not like that, he said quietly, turning away. But Mason wasn't done. You've got a little crush on the pretty teacher, huh? More laughter. Daniel walked faster. His cheeks burned. He didn't say anything, but the words stuck in his mind all day. That night, he opened his sketchbook and stared at one of his older drawings. One of Miss Carter, standing in front of the board. He flipped the page, then flipped another. All the drawings, all the words, they were honest. But maybe, just maybe, he'd let something grow in his heart that wasn't supposed to be there. The next day, in class, he barely spoke. He didn't look at Miss Carter. He avoided eye contact. His chest felt tight the entire hour. When the bell rang, he didn't stay behind. He grabbed his things and walked out fast. Behind him, Miss Carter called softly, Daniel? But he didn't stop. That he didn't know what this feeling was. But now it came with a shadow. Someone had noticed, and now everything felt different. After that day, Daniel changed. He stopped staying after class. He no longer showed Miss Carter his drawings. He sat quietly, eyes on his notebook, barely speaking at all. Ms. Carter noticed, of course. Everything all right? She asked one day as she passed his desk. Daniel nodded without looking up. Just tired. She didn't push him. She never did. But her voice held concern. The distance between them grew, not because she created it, but because he did. Daniel was scared, not of her, but of what he was feeling. The teasing, the whispers in the hallway, the look Mason gave him in passing. It all made him question everything. Was he crossing a line? Was he imagining a closeness that wasn't real? He stopped drawing her, stopped writing poems. He told himself it was nothing, that he was just a kid with too many thoughts, that Miss Carter was just kind, nothing more. But even as he told himself that, his heart ached. Weeks passed like this. Then one day, Miss Carter announced something in class. I've chosen 5 students for a special writing workshop downtown next weekend, she said. You'll get to meet real authors, share your work, and grow your voice. She read off the names. Daniel's was last. He froze. He didn't want to go. After class, he finally stayed behind for the first time in weeks. I can't go, he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. She looked at him carefully. Why not? He shrugged. I just don't want to. She nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't look convinced. I chose you because you have something to say, she said. You don't have to come, but I hope you do. Daniel didn't answer. As he walked away, she added softly, I miss our conversations. He paused, heart pounding, but he kept walking. That night, he sat in bed staring at his blank sketchbook. He hadn't drawn in days. The pages were untouched. The space between them had grown wide, and it was filled with things he couldn't say. The week went by slowly. Daniel kept thinking about the writing workshop. He would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Ms. Carter said, I miss our conversations. He wanted to go. He wanted to show her that he still cared, but a part of him was afraid. Afraid he'd feel too much, afraid others would see it again. On Friday afternoon, he stood in front of his closet, staring at the paper she had given him about the event. Saturday, 10 a.m. downtown library. He almost threw it away. But instead, he folded it carefully and put it in his sketchbook. The next morning, he dressed in plain clothes and quietly left the house. He told his mom he was meeting a classmate for a project. The city was busy, louder than he was used to. The library stood tall and clean, glass windows reflecting the sky that he nearly turned around. But then he saw her. Ms. Carter, standing near the entrance, talking to two other students from class. She looked relaxed, confident, like she belonged in this world of words and ideas. She spotted him, and her eyes lit up. "Daniel," she said, walking toward him. "You came." He shrugged slightly, didn't want to waste the spot. But the corners of his mouth curved just a little. She smiled, and it was the first time in weeks he felt that warmth between them again. The workshop began. There were authors, small writing circles, people reading aloud their stories. Daniel listened more than he spoke. Then one of the workshop leaders said, "Anyone want to share something personal they've written? A poem? A piece of truth?" Silence. Daniel felt something move inside him that he reached into his backpack and pulled out his sketchbook. From the back pocket, he took out the folded poem Ms. Carter had once read. The one about the night his dad left. He stood up. His voice trembled at first. But as he read, the room grew quiet, completely still. When he finished, the leader nodded slowly. "That was brave," she said. Daniel sat back down, heart racing, hands shaking. But he felt light, free. After the session ended, Miss Carter walked over to him. Her voice was soft but proud. "You didn't waste the spot," she said. "You owned it." Daniel smiled. "Thanks for not giving up on me." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're growing, Daniel. I see it. Don't be afraid of that." He nodded. That day, walking home, he didn't feel confused that he felt strong, not because of her, but because of what she helped him find inside himself. Still, deep in his chest, there was a small, quiet truth. He still cared about her more than he should. That night, Daniel sat at his desk with his sketchbook open. The pages were already filling up again. Sketches from the city, new faces he had seen, emotions he couldn't explain. But one page, right in the middle, was still blank that he stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, carefully, he began to write. Not a poem, not a story, just the truth. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. I like her. Not like a kid likes a celebrity. Not like some silly school crush. It's different. She makes me feel seen, safe, real. When she speaks, I listen, not because I have to, but because I want to. I think about her voice when the room is quiet. I think about her smile when my day feels too heavy. And when she says my name, it feels like the world stops spinning for just 1 second. I know I can't tell anyone this. I know I can't tell her. But this is the page where I'm honest. This is the page where I admit I've fallen for my teacher." He didn't sketch on the page. He didn't hide the words with art. He left it as it was, raw, simple, truthful. Then he closed the sketchbook, pressed it against his chest, and let out a long breath. It was out now, not in the world, but on paper. And somehow, that made it a little easier to carry. The next morning, at school, he held the sketchbook tighter than usual. He didn't plan to show her that page. He never would, but a part of him felt lighter, like he didn't have to run from what he felt anymore. Even if he kept it to himself, he saw Miss Carter in the hallway. She smiled. "Morning, Daniel." He smiled back. "Morning." That was all. No big moment. But as they passed each other, Daniel whispered in his head, "You'll never know what you mean to me." And somehow, just saying it in silence felt enough. For now. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when the clouds hang low and the world feels quiet. Most students rushed home after class, huddled under jackets and backpacks. But Daniel stayed behind. Ms. Carter was grading papers, sipping her usual tea. The classroom lights were warm, soft. It felt safe there, his favorite place in the whole school. He sat by the window, sketching the raindrops hitting the glass. "Daniel," Miss Carter said gently, "can you hand me the stack of poems from last week? They're on the shelf behind you." He stood, sketchbook still in his hand, and turned to reach for the folder. In that quick moment, maybe from the way his elbow bumped the desk, his sketchbook slipped from under his arm and dropped. It landed with a soft thump, pages fanning open. Before Daniel could react, Miss Carter had already knelt down to help him pick it up. Her eyes flicked down at the open page. The page, before he could snatch it back. Time froze. She saw the words, the confession. His heart jumped into his throat. I didn't mean for you to." But she looked up at him calm. Not shocked. Not angry. Just quiet. Asterisk Daniel stepped back, panicked. It's just writing. It's not real. I mean, it's real, but I wasn't going to tell anyone. Ms. Carter slowly stood up, holding the sketchbook in both hands. Then, without a word, she closed it gently and handed it back to him. He took it, barely breathing. She met his eyes, kind but firm. Thank you for trusting the page, she said softly. But some truths are meant to stay there. Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded. I'm not upset, she added. You're growing. Feeling things deeply. That's part of becoming who you are. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but he held them back. I'm sorry, he whispered. You don't have to be sorry for feeling, she replied. Just remember, it's okay to care deeply. But we also have to understand where lines are. Daniel nodded again. He felt ashamed, but also understood. Not judged, just gently reminded. That afternoon, he walked home in the rain without an umbrella, soaked, cold, heart heavy. But inside, something had shifted again. She knew now, and still, she was kind. Still, she cared. Even if it could never be more than that. After that day, after she saw the page, Daniel couldn't face her. Even though Miss Carter had been gentle, understanding, and calm, something inside him still burned with embarrassment. The words on that page were never meant for her eyes. They were for him alone, just a safe place to say what he couldn't say out loud. But now she knew. She had read the one truth he couldn't take back. So Daniel began avoiding her again. He stopped coming to class early, stopped staying late. He handed in assignments on time, but never lingered, never made eye contact. Ms. Carter noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed, but she didn't force anything. She gave him space. One afternoon, she left a note on his latest poem. You still have a voice. Don't let fear steal it. Daniel read it 3 times before putting it away, in his backpack. But still, he avoided her. Even when she passed by in the hallway. Even when he wanted to talk. Even when he missed the conversations they used to have. It wasn't just shame. It was confusion. He didn't know how to look her in the eye knowing that she knew. It hurt. Not because she rejected him. Not because she was cruel. But because she was kind. And that kindness made everything harder. Every kindness reminded him of what he couldn't have. One evening, sitting at his desk with his sketchbook open again, Daniel drew her for the last time. Not like before, not perfect or posed. He drew her standing by the classroom window, looking outside. Soft and thoughtful, like the day he first noticed her. He closed the sketchbook slowly, then placed it on his shelf. He decided not to bring it to school anymore. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that his feelings could live on the page forever. Maybe it was time to learn how to move forward. Even if a part of his heart stayed behind. It was a regular Tuesday when Daniel's mother got the call. Just a routine parent-teacher check-in. Miss Carter had said over the phone, I'd like to discuss Daniel's progress in writing. He's talented, but he's been pulling back lately. Daniel didn't know about the meeting until the night before. His mom knocked gently on his door. Hey, honey, your English teacher wants to meet tomorrow, after school. He froze. Why? She said you're doing well, but quiet. She just wants to talk. Nothing bad. Daniel's heart dropped. He nodded, pretending it was fine. But the thought of his mom and Ms. Carter in the same room made his stomach twist. What if she says something? What if she tells her about the sketchbook? The next day after class, he walked past Ms. Carter without a word. She gave him a small nod, almost like a quiet reassurance. After school, Daniel sat outside the classroom, listening. He couldn't hear everything. Just bits and pieces. She's saying good things about me, he thought. Why does that make me feel worse? When the meeting ended, his mom came out smiling. She's lovely, she said. She thinks you're special. She said you write like someone much older, that you feel things deeply, that you see the world differently. Daniel looked down at the floor. Oh, she didn't say anything bad, his mom added. Just that she wants to see you push yourself more. Said, you used to stay after class and talk about poems. Daniel nodded, quiet. Did something happen? His mom asked. No, he lied. Just busy, I guess. That night, he couldn't sleep. It wasn't just about the meeting. It was the way Ms. Carter had talked about him to someone else. The way she still believed in him, even when he was pulling away. Even though she knew what he felt, she still saw something in him. Not love, not romance, but something real. And that, in a strange way, made him want to try again, not to win her heart, but to find his own voice again. The next day, he opened a new notebook, not for sketches, not for poems about her, but for stories. His own stories. For the first time, they weren't about her, they were about him. Daniel sat in the corner of the library, a place he used to avoid. Now it felt peaceful, quiet, like it understood him. That in front of him was a new notebook, clean pages, no drawings, no hidden poems, just words. That he took a deep breath and began to write. There was once a boy who felt too much, that he didn't know what to do with all the things inside him. His thoughts, his heart, his questions. He met someone who made the world feel warmer, but he learned something important. Not everything warm is meant to be held forever. Some things are meant to teach you, then let you go, and that's okay. He paused and looked down at the words. That it wasn't a poem, that it wasn't a confession, that it was a story. And it was his. For the first time, Daniel didn't write to escape his feelings. He wrote to understand them. Later that day, he walked into Ms. Carter's classroom after school. She was packing her things, surprised to see him. "Daniel," she said gently. "It's been a while." He walked over slowly and handed her the notebook. "Can you read something?" he asked, eyes nervous but honest. She nodded and opened to the first page. As she read, Daniel stood by the door, heart pounding. When she finished, she looked up at him. Her smile was small, but full of emotion. "You're becoming a writer," she said. Daniel's chest rose, then fell. "Thanks to you." "No," she replied. "Thanks to you. You did the hard part. You faced yourself." They stood in silence for a few seconds. Then she added softly, "I'm proud of you." That moment felt bigger than any hug or praise he'd ever received. Daniel nodded. "I'm proud of me too." He walked out of the classroom that day feeling taller, lighter, not because he had let go of everything, but because he was learning to carry it differently. Time moved faster than Daniel expected. The final months of school arrived, and with them came the usual noise: exams, yearbooks, farewell events. Students talked about colleges, gap years, dreams. The hallways buzzed with excitement, but Daniel felt calm, not anxious, not overwhelmed, just ready. His story had changed, not just on paper, but inside him. He still saw Ms. Carter, of course, every week in class. They shared quiet nods, the occasional short chat about writing or books. Nothing more, nothing less. She had become what she was always meant to be: a teacher. A guide, someone who helped him find himself. One day, the school announced that a student would be chosen to read a piece of writing at graduation. Daniel didn't plan to submit anything, but when he got home, he opened his notebook and found that old story again. The one about the boy who felt too much, and without thinking too hard, he typed it up, changed a few lines, and emailed it to the school that he didn't expect to be chosen. But he was. When the announcement came, people clapped. His classmates looked surprised. Daniel just smiled, quietly. That afternoon, as he packed his books, Miss Carter passed by his desk. "You wrote that story months ago, didn't you?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "It's grown," she said. "Just like you." Daniel met her eyes, calm and strong. "Thank you for everything." She gave a soft smile. "You did the work. I just reminded you that you could." He wanted to say more, but he didn't need to. That chapter between them, whatever it was, had ended the way it should, with respect, growth, and peace. The day of graduation came. The gym was filled with chairs, flowers, proud parents, and flashes from phone cameras. Students wore their caps and gowns, nervous laughter filling the air. Daniel stood near the back, holding a printed copy of his speech. His hands were a little sweaty. His heart beat fast, not because of fear, but because this moment, it meant something. That he had been the quiet boy who drew in corners, the boy who kept his feelings on sketchbook pages, the boy who once thought love was something forbidden, dangerous, too big for someone like him. But now, he was about to speak in front of everyone. The principal called his name. Applause followed him as he walked up to the podium, the lights bright, the microphone waiting. He looked at the crowd. He saw his mother in the front row, smiling with tears in her eyes. He saw his classmates, teachers. And then, just to the left, he saw her. Ms. Carter, watching, listening. Daniel took a breath. Then he began to read. There was once a boy who felt too much, that he didn't know where to put it all. His heart, his thoughts, his fears. He thought maybe if he hid it, It would go away, but it didn't. It only grew until one day someone saw him, not just as a student, not just as a kid who sat in the back, but as a person. She didn't fix him. She didn't promise him anything. She just reminded him that feelings are not something to be ashamed of, and from that, he learned something big. You can love deeply. You can hurt quietly. And still, you can heal the SO. If you're someone who feels too much, don't run from it. Write it. Draw it. Share it. Or simply breathe through it. Because feeling doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. He looked up from the paper. There was silence. Then, applause. Loud. Real. Full. Daniel smiled. Just a little. That he stepped down from the stage and walked back to his seat. As he passed by Ms. Carter, she whispered, "That was beautiful." And he whispered back, "Thank you for seeing me." She nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. That chapter of his life had closed. But this time, it ended not with heartbreak, but with hope. The day after graduation, the school hallways were almost emptied, and no more classes. No more bells. Just quiet echoes and leftover decorations from the ceremony. Daniel had one reason to return. He needed to clean out his locker. As he opened it, a few books slid out, along with an old pencil sketch. He smiled softly. It was one of his early drawings from when he first arrived. When he was still hiding, he gathered his things, closed the locker for the last time, and started to walk toward the exit. Then he stopped. Something told him to take one more walk past room 104, Ms. Carter's classroom. He peeked in. She was there, alone, erasing the whiteboard and boxing up supplies. Daniel hesitated at the door. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, graduate." He stepped in. "Thought I'd say goodbye." "I'm glad you did." There was a small pause. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a thin envelope. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. She took it carefully, unsure. Inside was one final drawing. A simple sketch of the classroom window, sunlight streaming through, and a single figure, Miss Carter, standing by it, looking thoughtful. And below the drawing, just one line: "For helping me see the light, even when I thought I was invisible." She looked at the paper for a long time. No words, just a soft smile and a tear that slipped quietly down her cheek. She looked up at him. "I'll treasure this." Daniel nodded. "I mean it." "You always did," she said gently. They stood for a moment in the middle of the room, both knowing this was the last time they'd speak like this. "I'm proud of you," she said again. "I know," Daniel replied. "And now, I finally believe it." He turned to go, but just before walking out, he looked back. "Take care, Miss Carter." "You too, Daniel." The door closed behind him, and with that, their story ended. Not as lovers, not as anything forbidden, but as a teacher and a student, too. People who changed each other, forever. Summer passed quietly. Daniel spent most days at home, writing. He'd sit on the porch with his notebook and a glass of iced tea, listening to birds, watching the sky change. For once, life didn't feel heavy. It just felt still and peaceful. Sometimes, he'd reread the stories he had written over the year. Not just the ones about Ms. Carter, but the newer ones. The ones about characters chasing dreams, facing fears, letting go of people they loved. They were no longer just stories. They were pieces of him. By August, he received a letter in the mail. He'd been accepted into a small writing program in the city. It wasn't a big university, but it was exactly what he wanted. Quiet, creative, and honest. When he told his mom, she hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You're finally doing what you love." And he was that on his first day at the writing school. Daniel carried nothing but a worn-out backpack and his sketchbook, the same one he hadn't touched in months. During orientation, he sat beside other young writers who looked just as nervous as he once had been. They introduced themselves, shared what they loved to write. And when it was Daniel's turn, he said, "I write stories about people who feel too much, because I know what that feels like." Some students smiled. One even nodded in understanding. After the session, a girl with curly hair and a soft voice sat beside him. "I liked what you said," she told him. "Do you have anything I can read?" Daniel hesitated, then reached into his bag and handed her one of his stories. She read the first few lines, smiled, and said, "This is really beautiful." Daniel felt something warm in his chest, but this time, it was different. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't pain. It was new. Maybe the start of something. Not a crush, not a rush, just connection. A new chapter. And for the first time, Daniel didn't feel afraid of what came next. One rainy evening, just as the leaves began to turn golden and fall arrived, Daniel returned home from class and found an envelope waiting for him. There was no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. His heart skipped. He slowly opened it, careful not to tear the paper inside. It was a letter. Dear Daniel, I wasn't sure if I should write this. Teachers aren't supposed to cross certain lines, even in words. But I also know that closure matters, especially for people like us. People who feel deeply. I want you to know. I always saw you. From the very first day, not just as a student, not as a boy with quiet eyes and hidden drawings, but as a young man searching for something he couldn't name. You taught me, too. You reminded me why I became a teacher, to help people find their voices, to remind them they matter. I'm proud of who you're becoming. And I believe the world needs more of your stories. Never stop writing. With care, Miss Carter. Daniel read it twice. Then a third time. He folded the letter gently and placed it in the back of his notebook, behind all the stories he had written since. She hadn't crossed a line. She hadn't made it romantic. She had made it human. It was just what he needed. A goodbye. A blessing. And a reminder of how far he had come. That night, Daniel sat by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass. He opened a fresh page in his notebook and wrote, Sometimes, people enter your life to break your heart in the gentlest way, not to hurt you, but to help you grow. And when they leave, you find you're stronger than you ever thought. 1 year later, Daniel walked through the same school hallway where everything began. He was invited back to speak to the senior class as part of an alumni event. Something small, just a few former students sharing how their lives had changed since graduation. He passed room 104. He paused. The door was open, but Ms. Carter wasn't there. Instead, another teacher sat behind the desk, arranging papers. The name on the door had changed. Daniel felt something strange in his chest, like sadness, but softer. A memory, not pain. After the talk, where he shared his story about being a nervous student with a sketchbook, a few seniors came up to him. You made us feel seen, one girl said. Another asked, Do you have anything we can read? Daniel smiled. I'm working on a book, actually. Later, as he walked outside, he found a small bench near the garden where he used to sit during breaks. He pulled out his newest journal. On the first page was a short dedication. For those who once felt invisible, you were always there. Now it's your turn to be heard. Just as he began writing, he felt a presence beside him. He looked up, and there she was. Ms. Carter, wearing a soft blue coat and carrying a coffee cup, her hair a little shorter, but her smile still the same. I heard you were visiting, she said. I wasn't sure if you'd be here, he replied, surprised but calm. I come by sometimes, she said. Not to teach, just to see what's growing. They both looked at the trees blooming nearby. You've grown, she said. So have you, he replied. They sat for a moment in silence. Then she asked, Still writing? Always, Daniel said. Because of you. She shook her head. Gently. No, because of you. I just lit the match. You built the fire. He smiled, eyes soft. There was no tension now, no unspoken feelings. Just peace. Two people. A full circle. Before she stood to leave, she turned to him one last time. Don't stop, she said. Your words matter. He watched her walk away, disappearing down the path between the trees. And then he looked down at his notebook and wrote the final words of his new story. Some love stories don't end with kisses, some end with growth, healing, and gratitude. And sometimes, that's even more beautiful.